Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the Build Room. In this week's episode, we are doing a full auto transmission service on this 1998 R34 Nissan Skyline. And while that might sound simple, a surprising number of people get it wrong, which means today I'm going to run you through the full flush process that we're going to need to do on this. So stick around and check it out. All right, so yeah, auto transmission service. Step one, obviously, jack up the car, which we've already done. Bonnet's open, we are ready to go. And the reason I say this is not as simple as a lot of people make it out to be is that if you just do a standard thing of dropping the drain plug on this thing and then taking the sump off and swapping the filters over, you're only going to change out about 2 litres of oil or somewhere thereabout. And that's because obviously we have an amount of fluid in the sump, and if we were to drop it, we'd get rid of that. But we also have a transcooler in the bottom of the radiator that has fluid in it. We have a series of lines. I don't know how much they hold, but they do hold some. We've got all of the fluid that gets stored in the valve body of the gearbox. And then we've also got the torque converter. And for those of you that are unaware, a torque converter is basically what sits between the motor and the gearbox, and what it does is it translates power from the engine into direct driveline losses. So yeah, really helpful piece of kit there. But yeah, overall, this gearbox is rated as 8.3 litres of capacity. So, you know, if you're only dropping the sump and getting 2 litres out of it, you're basically just watering down whatever dodgy fluid is in there when you pour your new stuff in. So yeah, we've got a bunch of fluid for this. We've got new filters and a new gasket for the sump. But the next step is going to be, let's get under the car and see what we're working with. All right, first of all, for those of you who watched last week's Mammoth episode, we are now at about 500 Ks on this steering rack, and there are no leaks whatsoever, and I've had no problems with it. So yeah, definitely a win on that one. And yeah, moving back from there though, this is our auto gearbox and the sump for it. Now, the sump has a drain plug there, but we're gonna have to remove the entire sump to get to the filters underneath. But I am going to drain it first, obviously, just so we don't have fluid spilling out everywhere when we do take off the sump. And if we look closely at that sump plug, you might be able to see there's a different sort of colouring around there. I would say someone has at least had a go at dropping the fluid in this and filling it back up. It indicates there might have been some maintenance, either that or that part just stays a little bit cleaner. You can see along here, there's no real evidence of people coming in and tool marks on these bolts or anything like that. So potentially we have a virgin sump. So yeah, we're gonna pan on the floor, get that sump plug out and see how much fluid we've actually got. All right, so we're flowing. I'm gonna pull the dipstick so that we don't get a vacuum in here. All right, I'm gonna let this drain for a little while so that we can make sure we get every last little drop out. I will note the car is level at the moment, so that's important when you're trying to drain this stuff. So yeah, let's see how much we can get out. All right, so that's been draining for about 20 minutes now. We're not getting much more out of that at all. So we're gonna just nip it up. All right, and then we can measure what we've got in here. All right, so measuring jug, oil pan, and overflow if we need it. Let's go. I don't think we're gonna need that overflow somehow. All right, that is it. I'll let that drain for a second. But yeah, that is really only about 1.1 litres out of the sump. So not much at all. We'll decant this. It's very, very dark as well, anyway. All right, and now we can pull that sump off. All right, so we've got rows of bolts all the way along here. They're 10 mil. I think there's about 20 of them. And then there's these 2 lines here on the front of the box. We'll probably have to undo those to get to the heads underneath. All right, oh, and we're off. Looks like it's going to drop without needing to be levered off or anything, which is nice. Let's get this on the ground. Oh, there's still a bit of fluid in the pan. And lay that down in my head. All right, I think I might have went back a bit much when I was dropping this sump. That is a massive fail. Oh well. Yeah, we'll factor in about maybe half a litre extra on the on the how much we've salvaged. And there is a lot left in the pan. Not sure why that didn't drain before. All right, I'm gonna get this cleaned up. All right, and let's measure what's in the pan while we're here. All right, so that is another 800 mils there. So we're at 1.9 plus what's on the floor. You know, I'm calling it 2 to 2.4 litres maybe. And looking at the bottom of the pan, no big chunks of metal or anything like that, which is, you know, apart from the puddle on the floor, this is a pretty good start. So again, let's jump back under the car and have a look at the internals of the box. And this is the naked gearbox sans sump. And you can see, you know, there's some wiring in there between the solenoids and bits and pieces. I think this thing here is the pump that pumps the power steering fluid through the gearbox. And then you've got the filter, which is this big piece here. I won't get into that too much because I'll show you the new one on the bench instead. And yeah, there's not really too much that we're gonna do in here other than replace that filter. You can have problems with the solenoids, as I said before, and that means you're gonna be replacing these components. I don't know which, there's an A and a B solenoid, which normally go out. I don't know which is which, and I don't really want to spend the time to get in them now because, like I said, I don't intend to ever replace those. If the A and B solenoids are gone in this, we're doing a manual swap. For now, we'll jump back up to the workbench and I can show you the new parts and we can look at the filter in more detail. All right, so in terms of parts, first up, we've got transmission fluid. I am using Castrol Transmax Z. I have heard that in the R34 gearbox, this gives better quality shifting, less flaring, sharper shifts, all that sort of thing. So considering that I am having some issues, I thought I'd spend a bit more and get some decent fluid. The standard fluid is the Nissan Transmatic D. I don't know whether you can get that in Australia or not, but Castrol's nice and readily available, and lots of people were saying this is a reasonable oil. So there are cheaper versions of this that will match that Multimatic D or whatever it is, but do your own research on that one. And then we have the sump gasket. That is the genuine part number there. And then we also have the filter, or what is known as a strainer in Nissan, and a part number for that. Now, from what I understand, the filters are basically a fine metal mesh filter. So I'm gonna throw some gloves on now and I'll show you what they look like. But part of the deal is you only unwrap them when you need them. Because once they're unwrapped, they will start to, I believe, oxidize, and you don't want that in your filters. So yeah, throw some gloves on, get them unwrapped, and whatever they're coated in, you don't want to put in your mouth or you know, eat after working and all that sort of thing. So make sure you wash your hands after you play with them. But yeah, we're about to throw these things in, so I think they're okay to unwrap now. All right, so that's what we've got. Ferro Bright paper, VCI paper, volatile corrosion inhibitor treated. I guess this is probably what they need to put on bearings and stuff like that as well so they don't rust in the packaging. But that there is our filter, and you can see, should be able to see through it, it is a very fine mesh. Okay, and that is why we'll be wrapped in that paper. So yeah, let's get back under the car. We'll get that filter in and then the sump back on, and then we'll come back and we'll talk fluids. All right, so first step is get the old filter off. Bunch of different 10mm bolts here. You can take them all out. I would say have a bowl or something handy that you can put those bolts in, because you want to keep all of this stuff pretty clean. You don't want to get garbage muck all over these and then throw them back in and have that filtering through afterwards. Also, even though I did drop a whole bunch of fluid, the benefit is here that at least it doesn't smell like manual gearbox oil, which is just horrible. bunch more fluid and our old filter. All right, now I'm resisting the temptation to get this cloth and clean all this off, because the more cloth or anything that I put up here, the more chance there is of fibers coming off and things like that. So, you know, this amount of fluid is going to get so watered down by the clean fluid we're about to put in that I'm not really worried about getting it off, and I'm just going to sit to the side of it so I don't get dripped on. All right, now we'll put the new filter in. I'm just going to use 2 of the small bolts just to lock that in to start with. All right, now that's still pretty loose, but it's in place just so that I can get the other bolts in relatively easily. And there's 2 more shorties, one here and one here. And then all of the rest are the long bolts, which we'll just run through quick. So the torque setting on all the bolts is the same. It's actually quite a low torque setting. It's 6.9 to 8.8 Newton meters. So I don't want to mess around with this. I just want to be one and done here. So I don't want to over tighten or not tighten these up enough. So I do have my small torque bar here, so I can measure something that small and just get it right. So we'll just go all the way around. There we go. All right, so we're full circle and they're all done up. Now we need to swap over the gasket on the old pan with the new one, and then we can get that on. All right, so this is the old pan. Hopefully the gasket comes up in one piece. It's not going to. Nah, it's a paper gasket. It looks like this paper gasket's gonna come off in one piece. So yeah, I'll get all of this gasket off. I will clean out the pan with some degreaser. I'll also clean up this magnet. So this thing here at the back, that is a magnet which is collecting all the metal comes out of the motor. It's very fine, but yeah, that is wear in the gearbox. But this one doesn't look too bad. Like, there's no big chunks of anything in here, and that's the concerning bit. But yeah, that's not too bad. I'll get all this cleaned up, and then we'll get ready to put the new gasket on and get this back under the car. All right, so I just gave this a really good clean out just to make sure we didn't have any of the abrasive that I used on the, you know, this was just a Scotch-Brite, but I didn't want any of that in the pan or anything like that. This is the magnet, just a standard magnet, just straight over that dot there, no problems. And then this is the gasket, as I said, and what I'm gonna do is, I can't find out whether in the manual you're supposed to do this or not, but it had it on it and it wasn't leaking, so I'm gonna put it back. And I'm just gonna put a little dab of oil resistant Hyaluronic around each bolt hole. A couple of benefits there. Obviously, if it does need sealant in those holes, we've got it. And also it's gonna help keep the gasket in place while I put it on the car. We'll get the sealant on, we'll get the gasket on, and we'll get this thing back home. All right, so that is only a very thin layer. I don't want it crushing down and then squirting into the pan, because that'll get sucked up into the valve bodies. So I'm gonna line this one up. There is an up and a down on this one. These 2 corners don't have the same spacing on them, so let's hopefully get this right the first time. All right, I think that's all good. That gasket should stay where it is, so let's get it under the car. All right. We'll slip the front end in first because it's got to get under that line. And then, okay. All right, now the sump plug here has a copper washer on it. That is not reusable, so we need to pull that off and replace it with a freshie. So old one off. And then a nice fresh new one on. And then this one gets tightened between 33 and 39 Newton meters. There we go.
All right, it's time to get back up top and start donating some fluids.
All right, and just so we don't forget about this, this is the fluid that came out while we were taking the filter out. All right, and that's another 800 mil there. So I reckon we're at about 3 to 3.2 litres that's come out of the tranny. And in this bucket, there's probably about, what, 2.8 to 3 litres, being that we spilled a bunch on the floor. All right, so we've taken between 2.8 and 3.2 litres or thereabouts of fluid out of this thing, which means it still should have about 5, but I don't want to run it that low for the bleeding process. So I am going to top it up. I'm going to put another 3 litres into it, get it back to where it was. And I'm going to have to use the smallest funnel known to man for that bit. So this is going to be slow, but after that, we'll be able to pull a couple of hydraulic lines and hopefully do the bleed process a lot faster. All right, so that is about 3 litres. So we should be good to fire this thing back up now and get it ready for flushing. All right, so that was still on the low side a little bit, but for what we're about to do next, it'll do. Now for the next bit, what we want to do is break the circuit of fluid and basically have an outlet and then an inlet. And that will enable me to make sure that the whole system is flush, so the torque converter, all of the radiator, all of the lines and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the line which is down the bottom of the radiator cooler. So it's the long hose that goes all the way to this side of the cooler. I don't know whether that is an outlet or an inlet. So we'll have 2 open pipes, and when I start the car again, fluid is going to come out of one of those. So yeah, that'll be our output pipe. And then we'll start pushing good fluid in to replace what we've lost. And we're going to use 2 buckets to do that and a pump. Okay, so first things first in terms of the flushing procedure, we're going to have 1 container with old fluid and 1 container with new fluid, and we're basically going to try and flush them until the color of the fluid going into the old fluid container is somewhat close or almost the same as the new oil. And to give you an idea, this is 2 litres of brand new Transmax. And what I'm going to do is just mark it on the container where the 2 litre mark is. Doesn't have to be perfect. And here's another 2. So that's our 4 litre mark. And you can already see the difference between those 2. I would much rather have this stuff in my gearbox than this old crusty muck. And the reason I'm marking out 2 litre increments on this is because 2 litres is about the maximum underfill that I'd be happy with for the AT in order for it not to start chewing things out. Now, I don't know if this transmission has enough vacuum to pull in fluid. So I will try this first with a hose in here and a hose in here, and hopefully as stuff comes out here, it will get sucked in here. And if this increases at the speed that this decreases, we'll know we don't need any external pumps. But if we do, I do have an external pump, and then what you'll see me do is pump out 2 litres, and each time I get to a 2 litre mark on this, I'm going to try and pull 2 litres out from here. We don't have to get it perfect. We just have to make sure that we don't starve the transmission. And then once we're done, we're going to make sure that we fill and top off according to the dipstick in its hot position. Now, as I said before, the capacity for the Auto Trans is supposed to be 8.3 litres on the RB25. It's only 7.9 on the RB20 versions of this if you're playing with one of them at home. But the manual does also say when you're flushing these engines, you're probably going to use between 30 and 50% more to get the fluids all the way through. So I have 12 litres of fluid and I'm gonna need somewhere between 10 and 12 liters. So what I'll do is, I will keep flushing and flushing and flushing until I've gone through 10 liters. And remember, I've already put 3 in, so we're only gonna use up 7. And then we'll check how we're doing in terms of the quality of the fluid. And if it's looking good, we'll button everything back up, and then I'll just top it off to the right level. And so that we can check a 2 litre of fluid dumping to a 2 litre of fluid consumption, I'm gonna empty this one out now, and we'll start with a clean empty one, and then we'll jump under the car, we'll pull some lines, and we'll see what this thing does. All right, so this is the line that we're gonna take out. So it has a brass fitting on the radiator side, and then just a simple speed clamp to get the hose off. It's pretty easy to take off, and the reason I'm taking this one off is it's got a lot of length to it, so I can get it to hang quite far down, which will be handy. You can be damn sure this is gonna leak, so I'm gonna put the old bucket under it. Okay. And I've got some clear tube here for the brass end. All right. Well, that's not exactly neat, but it'll do for now. All right, so hose clamp up there, and hose goes in, and then the other hose is just clamped on the side here. So I'm gonna set up the camera and start the car, and we'll see which one fluid comes out of. All right, so that one's pretty conclusive. Definitely pressure side is the clear hose. So I'm going to extend the black hose so that I can get it into the clean tub, and then we'll move on. Okay, so right about now is when the battery on my lav mic decides that it's done for the day, and so the sound stops. But here's what's happened in a nutshell. So I fired the engine back up with the intake side extended down into the tub for the new fluid. As you can see here, we pumped a lot of fluid out of the trans and got exactly 0 suction on the new fluid. So it was pretty clear that we're gonna have to use an external pump here. So luckily I'd already picked up a 12-volt oil pump from Autobahn. It was about 60 bucks, but I'm sure I'll get use of it down the road, so I'm not really bothered. It made things really easy, and I just plumbed it in line with the intake, and then off we went. The good news is that the pump speed for the external pump flowed at a reasonably similar rate to the trans when it was running. So I think there was only about 1 or 2 points in this that I had to switch the car off and let that external pump catch up, so that I didn't let the fluid levels get too low while we were doing the flushing process. Overall, it was messy but uneventful. One thing is that the fluid coming out got really aerated. I'm not sure that's a big deal though. I just let it sit with the new fluid in the trans for about 20 minutes so that it could settle. I ended up taking about 8 liters of fluid out. That's in addition to the 3 we took out before, and we put 11 back in total. So it was time to put the trans cooler hose back on and give it a good clean up to get rid of all of the fluid that had spilled out. Then I topped it off at the correct level on the cold side of the dipstick. And while that happened, my mic's charged, so I was back online. All right, so I've run it for a bit and I've topped it off to where I think it's right. It's nighttime, so I'm not gonna run this for an extended period. What I'm gonna do is leave it overnight and drop it off the jack stands, and I'll take it for a drive in the morning, and we'll see how we did, so stick around. All right, so it is the next day. The car is back on the ground. It is looking good, and the test drive went well. No leaks or failures, that was the main thing, and I've probably done a couple of 100Ks. I've been trying to give it a good drive to make sure that there were no surprises. And yeah, in terms of any performance difference, man, it is night and day. So it no longer, I think the torque converter is doing its job basically. It's got the right fluid in it and it's locking up okay. So whereas I used to be revving out quite high and it kind of felt like a CVT, it now shifts and then stays at the right RPM in gear. It shifts quicker. It just feels more solid. I don't know how to explain that, but it just feels like it's running like it should. It did have the occasional hiccup for the first probably 20 or 30 Ks, maybe just sort of a little bit of air in the lines or something like that. But yeah, after that, it has been perfect ever since. Look, it's still a 20-year-old auto at the end of the day. I mean, my frame of reference for the last auto I drove was the 2020 Supra, and the ZF8 in that thing is an absolute beast. So yeah, it's no manual, it's no ZF8, but it'll do the job. At least until I go to swap the motor on this thing, I'm not worried about fixing the gearbox any further, which is a good thing to have off my plate. So yeah, pretty easy swap. I mean, it wasn't cheap in terms of fluid. That fluid is about $100 Australian a bottle, and I went through 3. So 12 litres of fluid through this thing overall. And the filter and gasket kit from Kudos, that was about $100 Australian as well, if I recall correctly. So about 400 bucks to do a fluid service on the Trans. So it is not cheap, but definitely worth it, especially if you don't know the history of yours or if you are having problems. But yeah, that's gonna make it an end to today's episode. So next week, we're gonna actually change the turbo on my daily driver, which will hopefully be a bit of a fun one. Until then, if you're new to the channel, I'll put a link to the Violet Crumble series up here, and I'll put a link to some other cool stuff down here. Other than that, I just wanna say thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.